Hi, my name is Dr. Steve Simpson and I work as an elite performance coach, which means I work with people just like you, because I am convinced that we are all capable of performing at a much higher level than we give ourselves credit for. We've got pretty perfect brains, all of us, and it doesn't matter what education you've had or not. It doesn't matter about your genes. It doesn't matter about your social class. It doesn't matter about what kind of work you do. Our brains are pretty much the same, and the problem is that we weren't born with a manual of how to use them. And that's what all my videos are about, and my podcasts and my blogs and the work that I do with clients. It's all about finding ways to tap into the deep power of the unconscious mind. So let's talk a little bit more about that. We all, according to the experts, we have 80,000 thoughts a day. Now, I have a feeling that it could be a lot more than that. It could be 80 million for all I know. But what we do know is that most of these thoughts stay at a deep level of the brain, which I call the reptile brain, which is just as well, because some of our thoughts would get us locked up into prison, or even worse. They would lead us into big trouble. And because our brains are the same, I suspect that everybody has the same thoughts at the unconscious level, and that would fit in with Carl Jung's view of the collective unconscious and some of my previous videos about infinite intelligence. It's all there. It's all there for us to tap into if only we could. Now, what happens to these 80,000 thoughts a day? Well, a few of them surface to a higher level of the brain, and we'll call that consciousness. So they move from the unconscious to the conscious. And when they're in the unconscious, they're unformed. They don't have words to describe them. They have feelings. We're aware of it, and that's what we might call intuition. So some of these thoughts rise to a higher level and are processed by the conscious mind, and they're sanitized. And of course, a lot of the original meaning of the thoughts is lost as we process this. And as we go higher and higher up the levels of consciousness and our ego starts getting in the way, we present these thoughts to everybody else in a sanitized way that will be fairly bland by comparison, and they need to be, but also some of that hidden truth, that hidden wisdom will have disappeared during this process. So splitting the mind into conscious and unconscious, which is the most important? Well, by size, you would have to say that it's the unconscious mind, because it makes up about 80% of our mind, and the conscious bit of our brain, which is where we're doing all of our thinking and planning and plotting and worrying, is 20%. These are rough figures. Nobody knows the exact answer, but some people say that 99% is in the unconscious mind, and our conscious in our unconscious mind, and our conscious mind is just a measly 1%. So because of this, because of the depths of power and knowledge at a primeval level in our unconscious mind, it means that when we start to try and use our conscious mind, we're already working with illusions. We're building these movies in our head, that other people would like to see, not necessarily what we want. We've already started the process of generalizing things and deleting a lot of stuff, and then distorting it to what seems plausible to our way of the world. So how about this? Think about this one, if you will. And it might take more than a coffee break. How about if everything you thought was real was actually an illusion? And everything that you think is an illusion is actually real? Well, you wouldn't be the first person to think like that, and you won't be the last. Some of the greatest minds in history have thought about this, and the advances, particularly in science, have all come from crossing the boundary between what appears to be real and what looks very likely to be an illusion, because that's where the secrets lie. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had my first inkling of that when I was a young kid at school. My parents bought me a cheap microscope, and it was probably the best present I've ever had. One of the first things that I did was I got a drop of water out of the drains, and I put it on the slide and I looked at it, And I couldn't believe what I saw in front of my eyes. It was a myriad of tiny organisms. There were little things I didn't know. They looked like tubes, and they had a crown on with little tentacles going. I didn't know what they were, but I explained, I made diagrams, and I asked my biology teacher, and he said, those are called rotifers. These were primitive life forms, of which before I'd looked through that microscope, I had no idea. Now we have the electron microscope, which is even more incredible. We can take pictures of every single cell, and we can see all the little organs of every cell. Really could live on its own. It has a life form of its own. It breathes. It manufactures energy, and it's a miracle. When you look at nature, you will always find miracles, but you need to have the microscope, or you need to have the ability to think in a different way. Staying with science a little bit longer, we're familiar with the electromagnetic spectrum, I'm sure. At one end of this spectrum, it's basically wavelengths, and our universe is made up of wavelengths and frequencies. At one end of this spectrum, we have the big waves. They can be many miles across, and radio waves. Some radio waves would fall into this category. And at the other extreme, we have the tiniest sort of nano waves, and they are almost always really dangerous because they will destroy the tissues of our body, and that would include the ionizing radiations and radioactivity itself. In the middle, those frequencies include the frequencies of light. Well, shall we say light as we see it, because it's a tiny band in the middle of this huge wave spectrum of wavelengths. And we believe that our whole universe is in this tiny band, because what we see, we believe. Believing is seeing. But what if we could expand our bandwidth a bit more? What would we find there? What would we understand? What's been out there lurking, just like those organisms in a single drop of rainwater that I studied under the microscope? And maybe some people can do this. That's why we have people that we call geniuses. They are very often in the creative industries. They're writers, they're poets, they're singers, they're dancers, and they see literally things that we don't see, or perhaps they sense them. Who knows? So sometimes our lives can feel very chaotic, but underneath everything, if we could expand our bandwidth, we will see that nothing in nature is ever chaotic. Newton knew this. Einstein knew this. Most, if not all, of the other geniuses of our times have known this. There is an underlying structure to life, which means that our lives themselves appear to be chaotic, but there aren't. Everything's for a reason. Now, the message here is that we fall into a very dangerous trap. We convince ourselves that we are living in this middle part of the spectrum, what we can see. We believe that this is reality. And because we have a conscious mind, we believe that we can control this reality, that we can put it into a box, that we can modify things, that we can bend them to our own shape, the way we want them to be. This is what causes the problems, because when you try and control stuff, you automatically cut yourself off from the wider wavelengths. It's the wider wavelengths where the magic happens. It's the wider wavelengths where we tap into what some people call the presence of God, or what other people might call infinite intelligence, or the power of the universe. It doesn't really matter what you call it, as long as you know that it's there. Because you're connecting to the little kid with the microscope, and you're seeing the world with your eyes open, and you're in rapture and awe. And I can recommend it to anybody. Thanks for watching this video. Have a wonderful day.